Hello, my friends. Touchnot here with you in the studio. Thanks for being here with me on the Touchnot channel once again. This is Mackintosh month currently. We're focusing on Clan Mackintosh on the Touchnot channel. Now, I want to say that over the years at the clan tents in New England, people have brought me items. Sometimes it's a piece of tartan, a book, a photograph, a postcard, a pamphlet, all kinds of things over the years, and I haven't, kept track of who those people were. Some of them I never met before that day and never saw again. And they made the trip to those festivals in order to give me these, knowing that I would in some way preserve them and see that they get a good home and go to good use, because many of these people pretty much told me they were not doing what they did anymore. They might have been former conveners. I'm not really sure. At any rate, I have a goodly pile of things. A very interesting Mackintosh-related story for you today about a schooner, a British schooner called the HMS Nancy, and its involvement in the War of 1812, all right, between the British government and the United States. This entire episode takes place up in the Great Lakes, some of which had different borders than they do nowadays. The British had part of the Great Lakes, probably a lot of it, more than Canada does now. I'm not certain of all that border-wise, but let's get into this. So what someone did give me is another book I have in my office, but this is called the HMS Nancy in the War of 1812. It's put out by the Ontario government. It's a government pamphlet about this fascinating story. So I'm going to use the book to underline a couple of parts of the story. The main body I'm going to read is an outline the same person gave me on paper, and afterwards a listing of the cargo of the ship, which I found quite interesting as a supplement to the whole thing. All right? Okay. So this involves the Mackintosh chief, the 26th chief. This is why this is a Mackintosh-involved story. The 26th chief, Alexander, took part in the story of the HMS Nancy, the British schooner, in the War of 1812. He was not chief at the time. Later, he returned to Scotland to become the 26th chief of Mackintosh. Okay, the Nancy story. The schooner Nancy was built in 1789 in Detroit, then British, as a transport for the fur trade by Forsyth Richardson and Company of Montreal. There were probably no plans, but it has been determined that her length was approximately 80 feet, her width or beam 22, and her depth of hold 8. She would carry 350 barrels. After launching at Detroit on November 24th, 1789, John Richardson of the company wrote, "She is spoken of here in such high strain of beauty, stowage, and sailing that she almost exceeds my expectations." The Nancy served the fur trade by carrying goods including food, clothing, rum, meat, powder, blankets, tools, trinkets, weapons, and ammunition up the lakes, returning with fur. Under the command of Captain William Mills, in the spring of 1790, the Nancy made her maiden voyage from Detroit to Fort Erie. In June 1790, she took a full cargo to Grand Portage at Sault Ste. Marie. In 1793, the Nancy was sold to George Leith and Company merchants and fur traders, who, toward the end of the century, sold her to the Northwest Fur Company, where her function remained that of a transport for fur and merchandise on Lake Erie, Huron, and Michigan. Captain Mills continued as commander of the Nancy until 1805, when he was succeeded by Captain Alexander Mackintosh. When the United States declared war in 1812 against Britain, the Nancy was lying at Mackintosh's wharf at Windsor. She was immediately moved to Amherstburg for protection and was requisitioned as a British transport by Lieutenant Colonel St. George, commander of the garrison. During the summer and early autumn of 1812, the Nancy was employed constantly on Lake Erie between Detroit and Fort Erie in the transportation of stores and provisions. The Nancy was away on a trip to Fort Mackinac on September 9th, 1813, when the British fleet was decisively defeated at the Battle of Lake Erie. This battle left the Nancy as the sole surviving British ship on the upper lakes. Finding Detroit and Amherstburg in American hands, Captain Mackintosh and the Nancy barely escaped the mouth of the St. Clair River and 2 American gunboats on October 5th, 1813. During the spring of 1814, the Nancy made 3 round trips from Mackinac to the mouth of the Nottawasaga River for greatly needed supplies and men. While away on the 4th trip to Nottawasaga, the Nancy was taken in charge by Lieutenant Miller Worsley, Royal Navy, and taken 2 miles up the Nottawasaga River to hide from the 3 American ships en route here. So it seems that Mackintosh has left the scene now. Right, so they're hiding upriver from 3 American gunboats. On August 14th, the Nancy was discovered and destroyed on the Nottawasaga River by American forces. It was here that she was burned to the waterline and sank. Supplementary thing just before that destruction of the ship. From this pamphlet, it's a section called Discovery. On August 15th, 3 American ships, the Niagara, Tigris, and Scorpion, under the command of Captain Sinclair, arrived at the mouth of the Nottawasaga River to wait for the British schooner Nancy, which was thought to be en route from Fort Mackinac. It was only when wood-gathering parties from the American ships happened upon the Nancy's hiding place that the secret was discovered. The engagement was brief and decisive. Lieutenant Worsley's command, the Nancy, consisted of 22 seamen, 23 Indians under the command of Lieutenant Ramsay Livingston, and 9 French voyageurs. Their armament was composed of 2 24-pounder cannonades and 1 6-pounder. The American force of 3 ships, with 500 men armed with 18 32-pounder cannonades, 3 long 12-pounders, and 2 24-pounders, provided formidable odds. Captain Sinclair anchored his ships in the bay and proceeded to pound the Nancy in the blockhouse across the narrow neck of land separated by the river from the bay. Apparently they were hiding behind a building in a little inlet or something. The boat was pulled behind there, but it was discovered by the men gathering firewood from the American ships. The situation was hopeless. Lieutenant Worsley decided to destroy the Nancy rather than allow her to fall into enemy hands. During the preparations for blowing up the schooner, however, a direct hit on the blockhouse set the Nancy ablaze. She burned to the waterline and sank. The British force escaped into the forest, where they were not pursued by the Americans. After the action, the Scorpion and the Tigris were left to guard the river to prevent canoes and bateaux, this is a French watercraft, from getting supplies to Fort Mackinac. Eventually, the river mouth was blocked with felled trees, and ships were proceeding along the north shore in the hope of intercepting fur-laden canoes on the lake. Back to this one for a moment. Just a moment. The Nancy's crew was avenged. The Nancy's crew avenged the Americans by capturing 2 ships, the Tigris and the Scorpion, in September 1814. Now, wait a minute. These men are off their boat in the woods. They captured 2 ships? Let's find out. We'll go back to the Ontario pamphlet. The Nancy Avenged. On August 31st, Worsley and his men, after paddling and rowing for 360 miles, reached Mackinac. En route, they had quietly bypassed the Tigress and Scorpion. On September 3rd, Worsley and 92 men in 4 rowboats returned to surprise and capture the Tigress at midnight in Detroit Passage. On September 6th, the Scorpion was lured into position and also captured. Incredible. Both vessels were then taken to Fort Mackinac. The Scorpion was renamed Confiance in honor of the ship which was captured from the French by Commodore Sir James Lucas Yeoman. The Tigress was renamed Surprise for the manner in which she was captured. I seem to be rooting for the British at the moment. I'm caught up in the Mackintosh moment, my friends. After the war, for the loss of the Nancy, the Admiralty awarded Northwest Fur Company 2,200 pounds. The British government, now that still existed in Canada after the War of 1812, awarded funds and compensation for the use of the ship. Awarded to the Northwest Company 2,200 pounds, in addition for 2 round trips between Fort Erie and Detroit in 1812. There was an award of 500 pounds. Now back to the story here a little bit. Now this is many, many years later, of course, my friends. The ship has burned to the ground, burned to the waterline and sank in the Nottawasaga River, I think near Lake Erie. Yes, it's at the bottom of the river in the silt, right? The silt, the sand, the mud, the muck. Gradually, the river currents deposited silt about the sunken hull, and an island was formed. On July 1st, 1911, Mr. Snyder found the location of the hull, which was just visible beneath the water, and it was not until August 1924 when an American 24-pounder round shot was found in the riverbank by Dr. Conboy that interest was renewed in the story of the Nancy. During the summer of 1925, the long-covered hull was found by Dr. Conboy, whose interest in the Nancy had been aroused by Dr. Snyder. The federal and provincial governments and many individuals became interested in the historic site, and in 1928 the hull was raised and placed on the island. On August 14th, 28, 114 years after the gallant defense of the Nancy, the first Nancy Museum was officially opened to commemorate this episode in the War of 1812. I hope you're enjoying this, my friends. This is quite a story. I don't know much about 1812, and certainly the Great Lakes battles. Naval battles we think of on the sea. Not so in 1812. Though the Great Lakes are certainly seas of their own. They're incredibly large bodies of water, my friends. If you don't know that. 114 years after the gallant defense of the Nancy, the museum was begun. In 1968, a museum, theater, and lighthouse were built. The unique architecture of the theater, where a sight and sound movie are shown, and museum was inspired by the sails straining against the winds of the lakes. Here, the hull was encased in a controlled temperature case. The Alexander spoken of above is our chief's great-great-grandfather. It was also, I'm not sure when this was written, my friends. I believe they're referring to the current chief. The Alexander spoken of is our chief's great-great-grandfather. It was he who had 2 of the Nancy's cannons sent over from Canada, and they are today mounted on the terrace of Moy Hall. So I hope you enjoy that, my friends. Not quite done, though. Another piece of paper here that was given to me, a handwritten bill of lading for one of the Nancy's cargoes that was recorded. Very interesting. Nancy Cargo, November 2nd, noted 2nd August 1814. Barrels of flour, 196 pounds each, 157. Barrels pork, 208 pounds each, 75. Barrels pork, 200 pounds each, 68. Barrels salt, 280 pounds each, 6. Shoes, cases, 3. 70 pairs each, 200 and, not sure, I lost that one. Stocks and clasps, 200. Upper leather sides, 24. Sole leather, 243 pounds. Candles, boxes, 7.5 pounds each, 350 pounds. And then at the bottom it says, I acknowledge to have received the above. Miller Worsley, Lieutenant Commander. So I hope you enjoyed that little episode of the War of 1812 and the Clan Mackintosh's involvement in that, the part played by the eventual 26th chief of Mackintosh. I had to look, I'm so many chiefs in underwater right now, my friends, it's not even funny. Alexander became the 26th chief later in his life. And in this episode, he was the commander of the HMS Nancy, a British schooner fighting against the Americans in the War of 1812 in the Great Lakes. Please stay with the Touch Knot and subscribe to the channel, my friends. We're working very hard on Mackintosh Month, and I hope you're following along. Touch Knot.